Over the last several months, existing immigration laws are being enforced a bit more stringently.
Immigration raids sparked protests and
In the
clashes.
past, interviews were routinely being waived.
The average process, the average wait times are being more prolonged.
The United States is facing a critical issue, a nursing shortage.
Since the U.S. passed major immigration reform, today, delays in processing work visas and narrow limitations on the number of visas allowed.
When you file a case, they may want additional evidence to support that you qualify for a particular immigration benefit. In the previous administration, interviews were being waived if there was strong documentation submitted.
Hiring an immigration lawyer, would that make the process quicker?
A lot of these immigration applications, you do not need to technically have a lawyer, but what I would tell your audience is not to fall in that trap. A helpful tip to overcome falling in that trap is
I can only imagine the benefit that they would have.
absolutely.
Out of all the different ways to get a visa, which one is the quickest, and is quickest always better?
There's many different types of visas out there. A lot of the common mistake that I'll see is
As an immigrant myself, I definitely can see the value bringing in different avenues of getting the path to citizenship, which is what everyone wants. Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. My name is Nick Salazar of LegalSoft. I'm an account manager here. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Michael Ashoori, CEO and founder of Ashoori Law. He is the best in the business, and today we're going to talk about the recent immigration changes. Mike, what major shifts do you see happening in the recent years in respect to immigration?
I'll focus more so over the last several months. There's more of a tightening of the screws with immigration laws. It seems that existing immigration laws are being enforced a bit more stringently. Things such as increased rates of requests for evidence. When you file a case with USCIS, they may want additional evidence to support that you qualify for a particular immigration benefits in the context of a marriage-based green card, for example. In the previous administration, we saw many instances of interviews being waived. So if somebody's in the United States and they're applying for a green card based on marriage to a US citizen, for example, the way the process typically goes is that there will be a petition that's filed with USCIS, and then towards the end of the process, there's an interview where an immigration officer will essentially ask questions for various purposes, but primarily to determine whether there's a valid marriage there. And in the previous administration, we saw several instances where these interviews were being waived if there was strong documentation submitted at the outset that made clear that the relationship was in fact a bona fide marriage. Now what we're seeing is that these cases are being set for interviews, and we're not really seeing instances of interviews being waived.
Based on that, do you see that the average process, the average wait times are being more prolonged?
For certain cases, yes, we're seeing that wait processing times are increasing. A request for evidence, it's a multi-step process. So the immigration officer has to review the case and then prepare this request, send out this request to the person that's applying for the immigration benefits. That individual has to review the request, prepare all the documentation necessary to respond to that request, send that request back to immigration, and then the immigration officer that's adjudicating the case has to review all those documents again and then submit either an approval or a decision or maybe a notice of intent to deny the case. So increased instances of RFEs and more stringent adjudication creates more work in the process. And if you have the same number of immigration officers that are taking additional actions in their adjudication process, what you can see is that it'll prolong the processing time. And the same goes with increased instances of visa interview. And the same goes with increased instances of immigration interviews. If you have situations in the past where interviews were routinely being waived and now every case is subject to an interview, that's also going to have the effect of increasing processing times.
So hiring an immigration lawyer, would that make the process quicker?
A lot of these immigration applications, you do not need to technically have a lawyer. But first and foremost, a lawyer can help you because an experienced lawyer has oftentimes done hundreds or thousands of these types of cases. So they can help you avoid common pitfalls that people fall into. So another thing is that you might go into an immigration case thinking that one type of case is the appropriate option for you, when in fact there's another option that's way faster. And that way, an immigration lawyer could potentially help you find an avenue or a type of case that's much faster than the one that you had originally intended. Now, another thing is requests for evidence can have the effect of tremendously delaying and causing excess time for your case because of that whole process that we illustrated earlier. An attorney, while they cannot guarantee that you're not going to get a request for evidence, they can help you file a more robust filing initially to help avoid the likelihood of an RFE. Now, they can't guarantee that you're not going to get an RFE because at the end of the day, the case is being processed by an immigration officer and anything is possible. But an immigration lawyer can help you strengthen the case from the outset to help minimize or reduce the chances that you'll receive an RFE compared to if you were filing a case on your own. Those are just a couple ways that an immigration immigration lawyer can help. The list goes on, but again, for brevity, we'll leave it there.
As an immigrant myself, I was consulting with an immigration lawyer and I recently just became a citizen. So I definitely can see the value in immigration attorneys and also just bringing different avenues of getting the path to citizenship, which is what everyone wants. Out of all the different ways to get a visa, which one is the quickest, and is quickest always better?
It really depends on the individual because there's many different types of visas out there, but you don't just pick a visa based on which one is the quickest. You pick a visa based on what your ultimate immigration goals are and what your particular circumstances are to help you determine what you're eligible for. So it's really an individualized assessment. It really depends on what you're eligible for. So when you're analyzing immigration, it really should be analyzed based on the individual's particular goals and their circumstances. So for one person, one particular immigration benefit might be available to them. Let's just take the context of an E2 visa. An E2 visa is an investor visa, and it's only available to citizens of certain countries. So if somebody's from an E2 visa country, an E2 treaty country, they could potentially qualify for an E2 visa, whereas somebody that's from a country that doesn't have an E2 treaty with the United States, they can't even be eligible for that type of a benefit. So whenever you're considering options, it should really be considered at the individual level of the person that's seeking those immigration benefits, and you want to consider their particular circumstances, like what their ultimate immigration goals are, whether they want a visa, whether they want a green card, whatever it is, and then what they could potentially be eligible for.
Each case is different, but what about businesses? What makes a business visa worthy?
It really depends on the type of visa. So there's all kinds of different quote unquote business visas. You have the E2 visa, which is a non-immigrant visa for investors to basically invest in their own business and be able to come to the United States to operate that business. There's an L1 visa that allows a foreign company to transfer a manager, an executive, or a specialized knowledge worker to work for a US company that has a qualifying relationship with that foreign company. And then you have an EB5 visa. It's an immigrant investor visa where somebody can invest a more significant amount of funds in a US business. That business has to then create jobs for US workers, and that investor can qualify for a green card in the United States for themselves and their family members based on making that investment. So there's several different types of investment-based business visas. So really it depends on what specific visa or green card option that you're targeting and making sure that that business satisfies those requirements. We can focus on the E2 visa if you'd like, just to illustrate this example. So what would make this business visa worthy is that one is the business should be an active for-profit business. So we don't want a situation where you're engaging in a non-profit type of business, and you don't want it to be a passive business. For example, if somebody wanted to just buy a condo and rent it out to a tenant, the immigration officer that would review that case would say that this doesn't qualify. This is a passive activity. This is not an active business. Let's contrast that with something that's more typically thought of as an active business, like a restaurant, where it's some sort of a commercial activity that's going to necessitate the hiring of employees and so on and so forth. So first thing is you want to make sure that it's a for-profit active business. To take it a step further, for an E2 visa, you need to make a substantial investment in the business to be eligible for an E2 visa. Now, when you're considering different business options, you have to consider this with the backdrop that you as an individual have to make a substantial investment in this business. Sometimes people are thinking, well, I'm interested in this business, but it's only going to really require $10,000 of initial investment to get the business to a point where it's operating. And $10,000 with that level of investment, you really risk that an immigration officer that's reviewing the case is not going to think that you've made a substantial investment. They're going to think that that investment is too small. So another thing that you want to consider when you're determining what business to potentially invest in is what is going to be the amount of investment that's required. Oftentimes, service-based businesses, investors struggle to find out ways to invest in such a business, whereas a traditional brick and mortar business or a business that involves selling products, that investor will have an easier time finding ways to invest a substantial amount in that business. Now, you might be wondering, what's a substantial amount? It's a complex analysis. In our experience, we recommend at least $100,000 or more. You definitely want to consult with an immigration lawyer before determining how much to invest or how much not to invest, because again, I'm just trying to simplify it to say that an investment of at least $100,000 or more in many cases can work for E2 visas. There's a lot of aspects to what would make a business visa worthy for purposes of an E2 visa. Another thing that I would say is just people are oftentimes asking us, what's the best business for an E2? Because they're considering different options. What do you think you as an individual will have the most success with? What are you experienced in? What are you interested in? What do you think you're going to have a passion for doing 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line? Because that's also very important to consider as well.
My next question was going to be, in your opinion, do the investors need to have a specific experience in the business that they want to invest in?
There are still ways to get approved without necessarily having the targeted experience of that particular industry, but having experience experience can certainly help because, again, when you do have that experience, when you're going in for your immigration interview in the context of applying for an E2 visa, or when you're displaying your credentials in a business plan that's submitted to USCIS, demonstrating that you have prior experience can give the immigration officer that's adjudicating the case confidence that you're reasonably likely to have success in that business. So it can help to alleviate that concern of whether or not you're going to have success with this business venture. Now, in some cases, if you don't necessarily have the exact experience operating the business that you plan to operate in the US as part of your E2 visa, there are potential ways to overcome that lack of experience. For example, showing that you have already hired somebody that's more in charge of the specific areas of the business where you may have weaknesses in terms of your knowledge base. So there are ways to overcome instances of lack of specific experience, and it's very important to analyze that and discuss that with a qualified immigration lawyer. And I want to kind of go to a broader point. Oftentimes when people are planning their immigration, they want to do a lot of the initial legwork and planning on their own. Maybe their mentality leads them to believe that they need to do a lot of this legwork first to get to a point where they can bring on an immigration lawyer to kind of pick it up and file it.
Right.
And what I would tell your audience is that not to fall in that trap. The earlier you start consulting with and getting an immigration lawyer involved, you're going to be in a better position because the immigration lawyer can help consult with you throughout all the many decisions that take place when you're considering your immigration path. First and foremost, they can help you identify what the right visa or immigration benefit is for you to accomplish your end goals. And then from there, as the questions arise regarding, for example, what type of business to invest in, does my experience matter? All these different things can be strategized with your immigration lawyer. In many instances, an immigration lawyer works on a flat fee. So I can't speak to every example, but in many cases, whether you hire that immigration lawyer 6 months before you plan to file the case or 2 months before you plan to file the case, their fee is going to be the same. And in many cases, you're going to get to take advantage of all that consulting over that window of time from when you hired them. Why not bring them on sooner rather than later?
It's always best for an applicant to just consult with an attorney prior to even making their processes available, right?
There's a lot of benefits to be had by consulting with an immigration lawyer early on.
Now, for the new immigration attorneys who are just starting the firms, what are some common mistakes to avoid? And what are some helpful tips that you can recommend for them?
A lot of immigration attorneys come from a background having worked in an immigration law firm, and they become great at processing cases, collecting the documentation that they need, preparing good legal arguments, and filing cases. But operating an immigration law firm involves so much more than that from a business standpoint. So a lot of common mistake that I'll see is discounting the 1,000,001 things that go into operating a business separate from acting as an immigration lawyer. So a helpful tip to overcome falling in that trap is having a very solid mentor that can help guide you. Somebody that's been there and done that and is willing and able to be there for you when you face whatever challenges that you may face. You have questions about things. Having a solid mentor that you can approach with these types of situations will be very beneficial to you.
I can definitely agree. I've also looked for the help of other mentors. They've helped me tremendously personally and on a professional level as well. So I can only imagine the benefit that they would have in respect to immigration.
Absolutely.
Right. So I know it can be hard to find some mentors in your practice area. I know that there's a conference coming up, AILA. Do you think that that'd be a good place for people to meet mentors?
I think so, because for one, you're just consolidating a lot of immigration lawyers in one venue with various opportunities for networking and meeting people. So yeah, I absolutely think that attending AILA could be a great opportunity to potentially meet a mentor.
For those people who don't really like to go to conferences, what other avenues would you recommend for mentorship opportunities?
I would focus on potentially some form of cold outreach. So I would look into different people that you think could provide you with valuable guidance and then reach out to them. And this is not necessarily like an immigration kind of specific thing, but I would say that when you're reaching out to somebody and you don't really have a relationship with them, it could be beneficial to reach out to them to provide value rather than making an ask. I think you're far more likely to have success in developing a relationship with somebody when you're providing them with some sort of value, as opposed to saying, hey, can you do me this favor? And I don't even know you. Not really related to immigration, just a more general concept. I think that if you're an immigration attorney and you're seeking mentorship, if you approach an immigration lawyer or a mentor of some kind and offer them some sort of value, whatever that may be, they may be more likely to be receptive of developing some sort of professional relationship with you that can evolve into a mentorship of some kind.
Of course. In your opinion, would you recommend for an attorney to just strictly focus on immigration, or can they split their practices up into other avenues?
Immigration is very much its own world. In general, you You have so many different areas of law. Immigration is so vast in and of itself that within immigration, you have several different niches of immigration lawyers. So not all immigration lawyers are capable of handling any type of case. There's immigration lawyers that focus on asylum work. There's immigration lawyers that focus on business and investment-based immigration. There's immigration lawyers that really focus on green card options based on self-petitioning. For example, there's certain ways that somebody can go about getting a green card on their own through categories such as EB-1A, which is a green card option for people that have an extraordinary ability. And if they can document that properly, they can get a green card on their own without needing an employer to sponsor their case. Or EB-2 national interest waiver, which is similar, somewhat different than EB-1A, but it's another avenue that somebody can petition for a green card on their own without the need for an employer. There's attorneys that really focus their practices on that. There's attorneys that really focus their practice on EB-5, which is the investment-based green card option that we talked about earlier. So immigration in and of itself is so vast that one immigration lawyer may not necessarily be able to handle all the different case types that can arise in the landscape of immigration. I've worked with many lawyers, and I've seen that there are attorneys that can have success operating in immigration along with other types of cases. But more often than not, what I do see is attorneys that are solely focused on immigration, no other outside case types. And within their sole focus on immigration, oftentimes they're focused on a niche within immigration, such as family-based immigration or employment-based immigration, or one of the niches that I just mentioned. Immigration is constantly evolving. There's constant changes and updates that you really need to be on top of. I would say that somebody that's considering practicing immigration law should consider going all in on immigration as opposed to doing a little bit of personal injury, a little bit of employment, a little bit of immigration, a little bit of trademark. I think that immigration, there's too much going on with it to split your focus among multiple practice types. Immigration is one of those fields that you really need to be committed to, focused on, tracking for any changes, being aware of everything that's going on. So I would say that if you're considering immigration to serve your clients, you should consider going all in on immigration and avoiding the outside noise, avoiding the other distractions.
So what projects are you currently working on right now?
We're a full-service immigration law firm, so we pretty much cover all forms of family-based immigration, business immigration, employment-based immigration, investment-based immigration. So we're basically working on all those different types of cases, whether it's a fiancé visa, a marriage-based green card, an E2 investor visa, EB-5 visas, whether it's an EB-2 national interest waiver, an L1 visa that we talked about earlier, where you can transfer somebody from a foreign company to a related U.S. company, EB-1A. We're focused on all those different types of immigration case types, and we're very happy to handle those.
Great. And where can our listeners find you?
We're based in Los Angeles, California. We work with clients worldwide, and we're very active on various social media platforms. We have an active blog where we're posting immigration updates regularly. We have an active YouTube channel where we're regularly posting high-value content to keep our audience informed. We have an active TikTok channel as well. We offer complimentary consultations on our website, so if you're interested in requesting a consultation with us, the information will be in the description below.
Thank you, Michael, for attending our show. I also wanted to thank our listeners for tuning in. For those of you who don't know, we will be at the AILA conference in Denver, Colorado from June 17th to the 21st at the Gaylord Rockies Resort. Our CEO and founder, Hamid Cohen, will be speaking at the event, and I also will be there at booth 1024. So feel free to stop by and come get $1,000 off for your next VA.
Thank you so much, Nick. It was a pleasure to be here with you. It's always a pleasure interacting with LegalSoft and the team at LegalSoft. You guys have an absolutely tremendous, wonderful CEO in Hamid Cohen. It's wonderful to hear that he's going to be speaking at AILA, and I'm sure he's going to have some very valuable insights to contribute there. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So for those of you listening and still haven't subscribed, feel free to turn on notifications and hit subscribe button. We will be having our 100th episode pretty soon, and we'll be covering some neat topics there. Thank you.